Okay. All right. If you guys notice anyone else hops into the waiting room, you'll let me know because I don't see that part of my screen. Okay.
You want to make me a host and I can let them in?
I will do that. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you. All right. So welcome. And it's been fascinating to start this journey of learning Tanya more in depth. And in last week's class, we started looking at, so the way this class is titled Tanya in Real Life. So it's not like word by word of each of the texts of Tanya, which, as I mentioned last week in the first class, if you were doing it, if it's your first time learning Tanya, this is like a great overview. If you've learned Tanya before, this is a different way of taking the concepts and applying them to your emotional health, your psychological well-being, because we're so multifaceted, and to understand ourselves on all these different levels. But I don't take this as the be all and end all lesson. I strongly encourage people, to either do it simultaneously to get the book Lessons in Tanya, which I did mention is available either on Chabad.org or on Torah Cafe. And then also there's some wonderful classes by Rabbi Naftali Silverberg and others who really just teach it, more step by step. I also did throw it out that if people, like to hear the overview each week, and then we should go in depth chapter by chapter, they could give me that kind of feedback, and we could, build this class based on how you guys want it to be. So, so I'm going to actually start this class a little bit differently this week. And this week, unfortunately, we keep, losing people to this terrible, terrible pandemic. And the world and the Jewish world lost a giant in Torah thought and in psychology, a doctor, Rabbi Abraham Twersky. And he was like an incredible teacher, master, doctor, psychiatrist, and just an incredible man. At the age of 90, he passed away. And as a little kid, he had authored so many books, but he authored one to get that had Charlie Brown comic strips. I remember as a kid loving to read the Charlie Brown in them. But he really was just an incredible, incredible man. And he authored over 60 books. And someone once said to him, Dr. Rabbi, how did you author 60 different books? He said, well, really, I just authored one book 60 different ways. So he said, what was his overriding message? What was he trying to teach people? What was he trying to say? He said, listen, I'm a doctor, I'm a psychiatrist, I see people in practice. But what I realize is that people aren't fully happy, and that's why they come to me. And they're trying to figure out why am I not happy, what's going on. And he said, as I realized in my broad knowledge of all these different subjects, is oftentimes their unhappiness in life comes from spiritual maladies. That spiritually, they don't have a sense of purpose. They don't have self-actualization. They're not leading a meaningful life with goals. And, I want to help them, and I want to direct them and give them, information. And so I feel like in us learning the lessons in Tanya in this emotional well-being type of way, we're taking deep lessons of Torah and making them applicable to our lives, because we're so multifaceted and we need to give expression to all the parts of us. Because if we're completely spiritual beings, then we're angels. And if we're completely material beings, then we're just, then how does this all work together? And this is a lot of what we're covering in the story. And interesting in the classes. So interestingly, he actually said that, he gave the example of a lobster. I mean, the most trite thing you could give an example of, but he said a lobster actually is a very, very, very soft sea creature. So but if you're a very soft sea creature, again, you're very vulnerable to all the larger sea creatures eating you. And he says, so what does God do? What does Hashem do? God gave the lobster a very hard shell. What happens when God gives the lobster a very hard shell? The hard shell protects the lobster. But as the lobster grows, that hard shell starts to confine the lobster. So now he can't move. Now he can't grow. So now he's just, he wants to get bigger. No one wants to stay small, but now he can't grow. The only way for the lobster to grow is to shed that shell, to grow, and then to grow a larger new shell. But as he sheds his shell, he becomes very vulnerable again to all the large sea creatures being able to attack him. But only through becoming vulnerable is he able to grow the larger shell in order to grow. And that's exactly us. A lot of times we think the things that are protecting us are really the things that are confining us. And sometimes those false sense of security is what we actually have to shed. We have to become vulnerable. We have to open ourselves up. We have to grow, and then we get new things that give us a sense of security. And that's called the journey of life. And it's an ever ongoing process and evolution within ourselves, in our realities of becoming more vulnerable, opening up, shedding the false sense of security, and then going forward. So in today's class, we're actually going to spend time we're going to actually spend time reviewing some of the stuff from last week from last time that was confusing for some people, and I had some feedback, and I just wanted to, clarify before we go on to the next section. And, we'll pretty much spend today clarifying a lot of things and just making things, more understandable. So in last week we spoke about that the Tanya is a small book, but so one of the questions was, and last week at the end of the first chapter, we start to meet, we have two selves. We spoke that we have two drivers of ourselves, two completely different forces that are the drivers of our engine. And last week we met the animal self, and then in the next chapter, we're going to meet what we call our awesome self. But before we get to that, we're still going to focus a little bit on our animal self and meeting that, and understanding a little bit more about who that is or what that is within inside of us and in our psyche. So last week, someone said a question is, isn't the book of Tanya, which is, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, who wrote the Tanya, isn't it like a guide to, isn't it a Kabbalistic guide of Torah and about serving God? So why are we taking this book out of context and talking about it, about our emotional self and about giving ourselves meaningful, energized life? Isn't it about serving God? So how does that connect? So when the Baal Tanya, when he wrote his book, he actually, someone asked him, he said that this book that he's writing is in a response to all the myriad of questions that he gets from all the people all the time. This book is his attempt to answer all the questions. So now that is a very bold answer, and a very bold, not many authors say that. But there's so many nuances in the Tanya, and there's so much to learn that, there's really so many answers for all of us all the times. So a lot of times we can think that our emotional wellness is totally separate from our service of God. There's my emotional self, and then there's God. God's this big guy up there. And it's separate from my, my emotional wellness and my spiritual development are two separate things. But actually, because our neshama, our soul, is part of who we are, we cannot separate our spiritual identity from our physical identity. You see, it's our essence. It's the core. It's the driver. Our spiritual identity, the piece of Hashem that's in us that we'll learn all about us, it goes hand in hand with our emotional wellness. We're one being. So even if we have different components to ourselves, everything needs to work together and find expression so that we can live an emotionally energized, meaningful life. We cannot separate the two from each other. We can't have a spiritual section and then an emotional, physical section totally separate. So that's why I'm teaching it this way. But if you're learning and listening to Tanya and you think, I'm not loving all, what we're really saying, there's plenty more to learn. Don't blame the Tanya. Blame me is what I'm saying. That maybe I've just translated not well enough, and you can come back with more questions. Tanya is not a short list, and even if and when we go through step by step, like the actual wording, like line by line and lesson by lesson, and not just the overview and the messages that we're pulling out of it. It's not a short list to make your life better, your relationships better, yourself feel good, etc., etc., etc. It's much more philosophical approach to understanding the text and understanding Kabbalistic terms and the effects on our psyche and how to incorporate it. But it's a slow, deep learning. It's open. It's making ourselves vulnerable. It's shedding the shell of just understanding spirituality totally separate from ourselves as this spiritual goal, and then there's my emotional self. It's a slow learning, but the more we learn, the more we open ourselves up to Torah and understand this work on a deeper and deeper level. Slowly things change in us, and mindsets can change for us, and then it can have an effect. And like I said, if things don't resonate, ask more questions, look more deeply, the answers are there. Okay, keep learning, keep exploring. So there are many lessons in Tanya that address the spiritual service of Hashem, but we're focusing mainly on the ideas of our emotional wellness. So that is, yes, Tanya is a book that talks about our service of God, but we're understanding it on an emotional level. So last week we spoke about that when the soul comes down into this world, it promises to be a tzaddik and not to be a rasha. And even if the whole world tells you that you're a tzaddik, you should consider yourself as a rasha. So what does tzaddik mean and what does rasha mean? So we say that most people just translate that as a righteous person and as a wicked person, as a person that does good and a person that does bad. And we spoke about that good and bad are such vague terms in a way and non-definitive terms, because what I think is good, even by the standards of the world, even if most of us agree that killing isn't good, even not everybody in the world can agree that that's good and this is bad. So what does good and bad actually mean? And so we were looking for new words to explain what does it mean when you make decisions? How do we make decisions? How do we not put into ourselves and give ourselves that self-hate and that self-thought of like destructive words like, oh, I'm bad. Another thing is that if I'm bad, if I do something bad, then once if bad is out of the box, and in my family being bad means that I didn't eat dinner at the supper table, I ate on the couch, and that was a bad thing to do, well then I might as well just, not do homework, skip school, hang out with the wrong company, because I'm already bad. Because once I'm already taking one, if I'm out of the box, then I might as well be out of the box. But that's not the way the Torah sees it. And so the translations of good and bad are not really helpful for us. They don't bring us growth. They don't bring us, internally, they don't give us peace. And so we had to find new words. What does it mean to eat tzaddik, al tehi rasha? What does it mean to make choices what are those words, what are those choices that we're trying to make in our service of God, in our service of life? So someone said last week, we have to cancel are we canceling the word bad? Like bad doesn't exist. So no, we don't say that the idea of bad doesn't exist. The translation that we've given it is wrong. And so we have to give it a different translation. So, because if we say someone is bad, so what happens if I throw out the word bad? Everybody has a different thing in their mind when they think I am bad. Well, one person means I burnt the soup. For the other person, it means, I left dishes in the sink overnight. For the other person, it means I actually committed a crime. So everyone has a different definition of this word. So what we're trying to understand is, what is the Baal Tanya? What is the Alter Rebbe who wrote the Tanya? What is he trying to say? What is the definition? We're not canceling it, God forbid. We're just giving it clarity and empowering it. So we translated the word bad last week, that the choices are, it disconnects you, it causes disconnection or connection. So disconnection would be bad, that I am disconnected from God or from choices that I should be making, or I am connected to God or choices that can be made. But actually, we've gone back and looked at this from feedback and learning more deeply. You see that it's not, even connection and disconnection are not really the best words to use, because we can never, ever truly be disconnected from God. So last week we gave an example that the sun could be shining outside. You cannot stop that for thousands and thousands of years. Every morning the sun comes up, at night it goes down. There's no way that you can stop that. It is a phenomena that God puts into this world all the time. But you could choose to go into a room, pull down the shades, put up dark shades, sit in the dark, and have no pleasure or connection to that light. So that is how we said that you could be connected or disconnected, that the light is anyhow there. But it's the same thing. It's like, saying about like the clouds, like the sun, if the clouds cover the sun, doesn't mean that the sun's not there. It just means that the clouds are covering it. So we can never be disconnected from God. So we need to think of better words that help us feel connected. So that help us define good and bad in our choices and in our decisions. So a better way would be to say aware or unaware, that this choice is a choice that brings awareness, or this is a choice that causes unawareness, or maybe consciousness or unconsciousness. This is a conscious choice or unconscious unconscious choice. You see, disconnection, we live in a world now where the word connect and disconnect has become very common because, we have electronics and you connect something and you're disconnected and da. But eventually, if you keep using those words, like this choice is this decision in my life causes connection, this choice causes disconnection. After we've made, God forbid, enough decisions that cause disconnection, we can eventually come to think, oh, so now I've caused separation. And that never happens. We're never separated from God, or, he's never not there. It's just so. So knowing that I can never disconnect from God, I can never be out of his ultimate oneness. The truth is that ultimately, ein od milvado. There's nothing but godliness in this world. If we understand it, if we don't understand God created, he continues to create. And as we learn more and more, it becomes more and more apparent to us. And each of us, as we'll learn more and more, is chelek elokam mima'al mamish. We're made in the image of God, but we're also made of the peace of God within each of us. We are the finite expression of the infinite. This is what people are. We are an expression of God. So if we know that or we don't know that, if we're aware of it or unaware, if we're conscious or unconscious, that never causes disconnection. It's just a matter of how we understand it. So that's why we need to change the words from last week from, to consciousness to unconsciousness, and I'll use or aware and unaware, and I'm going to not be using the words connection and disconnection much better. You see, but then, someone was, a woman was saying, in this conversation, but you see, unless people have an inkling of inner work or meditation, and a lot of people are into that now, into more energy healing, meditation, working on the inner selves. For those, unless you're like into that world, it's very hard to choose consciousness, like to understand what that means, or to know what does awareness look like. Like, so what does that look like to me? So we have to keep explaining it, and people learn in different ways. And so maybe we need different language to help us understand what are these decisions in life that we're making that are consciously connecting us to God, or unconsciously disconnecting us, or giving us awareness or unawareness. So maybe if we use different words for good and bad of what to see how the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, the Baal Tanya, is what his paradigm is. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. It's for a visual learner. That is like the visual learner, for good and bad, he's saying revealing or concealing. That's like the sun's concealment on a cloudy day. It's always there. Godness is always there. Sometimes we make choices that reveal it, and sometimes we make choices that conceal it. So for a visual learner, that would be a better wording. For kinesthetic learner, maybe you say feeling versus numbing. Our favorite place to go, to the dentist, LOL, and nothing against any of my dentist friends, or my own dentist for that matter. But, even when your mouth is numb, your teeth are there, your gum is there, your lips are there, your tongue is there. It's all there. You just can't feel it. So that is the difference of feeling or numbing. And those are when we make these decisions, does this decision make me, feel closer to godness, closer to spirituality, closer to myself, closer to my true being, my true mission? Or is this action a numbing action that, even though all that stuff still exists within me and it will always be part of me, I have removed myself further? Or an audio learner might be amplifying the sound or reducing the sound. And, the sound waves are always there. The radio waves are always there. Is my action raising the volume so that I hear it better? Or are my actions lowering the volume that make it harder for me to hear? So, and we all have this expression. We all have experience with choosing to tune in or tune out, zone in or zone out. So hopefully every person finds words. So, this is the Baal Tanya's paradigm. Don't say good and bad. Those put us in a box or out of a box. But say words that work for me. Am I turning the volume up? Am I turning the volume down? Am I revealing something? Am I numbing it? Am I tuning in? Am I tuning out? Am I zoning in? Am I zoning out? Am I making a conscious decision or an unconscious decision? Making myself more aware or less aware? That's the paradigm of good versus evil. So next time, when a person finds themselves, calling themselves a bad name, or bad words, giving ourselves bad labels, or thinking of ourselves in self-hate, hold up that label, instead of saying like, this is making me bad or putting me in that category, to the Bala Tanya's paradigm of how he sees good and bad. And say, was this behavior making me more aware or unaware of God's presence? Was it turning up the volume? Was it turning down the volume? Was I zoned in? Was I zoned out? That's the reason that we need the paradigm. So we don't haphazardly distribute negative labels on ourselves or on others. Because the more we can, because if we can identify what the behavior is, then it becomes, okay, I became a little less aware. It's not such an overwhelming label, and then I can work on it. Okay. So that's how, just to connect, to fix how we're going to use the words as we go through, because the word ra, evil, does come up a lot within the Tanya. But if we understand it not as like this crime, or as like, every person has a different way of translating it, then we're able to learn on a much more healthy emotional way how to integrate into ourselves. So it's a very important question. So last time we spoke a lot about the animal self, okay, which is one driver of our operating system. Our body's our operating system, or our self, our full self is our operating system. And one of those drivers is the animal self. So a very important question is, how is our animal self, or is our animal self, different from our Yetzer Hara? So the Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. Okay, they're two separate things, and it's very important to know what is my animal self, what is that driver of this operating system, and what is my Yetzer Hara, that voice in my head, the evil inclination. Often they get interchanged, and they're not interchangeable. Okay, so the animal self, the animal soul, is one of the two completely different forces that drive us. Our entire nefesh habahamis, that's what it's called. A nefesh means like a neshama, a soul. Our animal soul, our animal self, is a state of being in which we are unaware of Hashem. Okay? Naturally, this state of being will most likely, like we spoke, that it's made up, that our animal self is made up of the four elements of the world, of fire, wind, earth, and water, and how, it's like the anger, it's our laziness, it's our, it's this connection, it's all those potentials within us. And we spoke about that last time. But it's like just our natural being. And if we let that, lead our life, it could lead us to a lot of destructive behaviors, because most of our meaningful qualities and behaviors come from our awareness of godliness, of Hashem, of something higher. So, so that's what our animal self is. So how is our animal self, or our natural self, different or similar to our evil inclination? Okay, so let's look at some of the facts that we learned about our animal self, or our natural self, in this one driver of our being last week. The first thing is, what is it? What is it? Where does it come from? Mitzat haklipa v'sitra achra. It is from the place other of Hashem. It means it's a place of Hashem's hiddenness. It comes from sitra achra, means the other side. And it's basically from a place where there is potentially awareness and potentially a lack of awareness for Hashem. Not that there is a lack of awareness, but potentially it's a lack of awareness. It's a place from Hashem's hiddenness and not being able to see it. Where do we find it in our bodies? Where is it in ourselves? And the words that Tanya says, it is our blood. It's what gives us our life force. It is in our bodies. It's what runs through us all the time. It's what that is, our animal self is what gives us life. And what impact does it have on us, this animal self? It's the root, and it's Baal Tanya writes that our animal self is the root of all our qualities that demonstrate our lack of consciousness of God, of God's presence. The reason that we have any potential or any qualities the reason that we have anything that demonstrates the lack of awareness or lack of consciousness or zoning out of Hashem's truth is because we had that potential inside of us. So it does have a very big impact, because all the reasons that we go to the ra, the bad, the unconsciousness, unawareness, zoning out, turning down the volume, tuning out, all those is because of our animal self. It has all those potentials. That is where all those inclinations and potentials lie. So isn't there anything good about the animal self? So what? Yes. Firstly, what we also said at the beginning is that it comes from Misitra Akraba HaKlipa. Klipa we spoke about last time is the peel. A peel hides, it's from the place of hiding, of hiddenness. But what else does a peel do? A peel protects what's underneath it. So even though this world and some of these characteristics and potentials are hiding what's underneath it, when you take that peel off, then the juice is the fruit is much juicier. There's so much more potential within it. So this peel, it protects and enables the fruit to be more tasty and fresh. So when we can uncover this animal self, the potential can rise so much higher, we can direct it in other ways. And so that's one good thing about it, is that it's just a klipa, it's just a covering, and so we can, peel it off and not have to give expression to it. And also this, even though it is our potential for laziness and anger and being pulled down and earthly pleasures and different things that we explained worldly pleasures that we explained last week, it also is our natural drive towards compassion and kindness. Because even when we are unaware of Hashem, even when we're not, aware, tuned in, zoned in, conscious of Hashem or godliness or spirituality, we are still driven to be kind and compassionate towards others. So that is, part of the animal self is that inclination. Okay. So where does our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, fit into all of this? Our animal self is the operating system. It has the potential to be unaware of Hashem, but it also has our animal self also has the potential to be harnessed and transformed into awareness, consciousness, being tuned in. It has the potential to use all those characteristics to be more aware of God, conscious, zoned in, tuned in to godliness. Our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, is something totally different. The Yetzer Hara is the inclination, is that voice that wants us to embrace our animal self. As we say, we have two drivers of ourself. We haven't really introduced the second one. We're talking about the first one, which is one that we actually get first, which is our animal self. It's our natural self. It's in our blood. That's the one that we're given first. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is the inclination that comes along and gives us a voice and says, no, this is not, the animal self is not just part of you. It is your only self. That's all there is. And it tells us to, it encourages us. That voice in that inclination that encourages us to engage in our entire life from a position of unconsciousness. We're not bothered if we have the potential to be lazy, the potential to carry resentment, bear grudges. We're not hurt by those desires. When we get hurt by those feelings or those desires is when we act upon them. Not that we can bear a grudge, but if we do bear a grudge, that it pulls us down. Not that I can be lazy, yes, but if I act upon being lazy all the time, then that's what pulls us down. So when we think that those desires are the be-all and end-all of who we are, then we have to listen to those desires. It's like saying, we mentioned this example last time. If I say, I'm such a messy person, and as I say I'm such a messy person, I'm actually giving myself permission to be messy. So I take my clothing that I just got and I drop it on the floor because I'm a messy person. But if I convince myself that if I give expression to all those characteristics, and I believe this is the be-all and end-all of who I am, and then I have to listen to those desires, then that brings me to a level of, that's the Yetzer Hara talking. But he gives us that, it's terrible because a woman shared that she was going through a terribly debilitating postpartum. But to a terrible, terrible point. And it was very drastic. It needed to be obviously, medically taken care of. And her life was actually in danger. But the one thing that saved her was she had the conscious knowledge. She said, there's something outside of this anxiety. This anxiety might be part of the operating system inside of me, but it is not me fully. I'm in it now, and it's real, and it's overwhelming me right now, but it is not the be all and end all. There is something beyond this anxiety. And just holding on to that awareness, just holding on to that truth that the anxiety is not me and not the be all and end all of who I am, that this characteristic is not going to define, doesn't have to define everything. At the same time, allowing her feelings of anxiety and all those feelings that she was going through in that real postpartum depression to be. You need to let those feelings be and to go through them. But at the same point, knowing that there's something beyond that or more than that, it literally saved her life. You see, the feelings of anxiety or hard things, those come from our animal self, from that operating system. And the feelings come, when there's a lack of awareness of Hashem's presence or where we're in a dark and hard place. But where the evil inclination, where the Yetzer Hara comes in, is the voice that tells us that's all there is. It's not a lack of awareness. That is the full thing, the full picture. Not, oh, this is an illness. No, this is who you are. This is everything you are, and you'll never be able to change or get out of it. Our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, is our inclination to embrace our animal self as our only self, to embrace our behaviors, our qualities, our emotions that come from a place of lack of awareness, of zoning out, of unconsciousness, of tuning down the volume on Hashem's presence and saying, this is the truth. That's what the Yetzer Hara wants us to believe. That's what the evil inclination, that's what that voice in our head wants us to believe. Don't worry, there's the counterpart to it. So it's not like we're stuck in this, but being aware that it exists. Now, this is a very important thing. I'll come to this in a minute. That if you want to, the reason that we go so deep into all this, because if you want to play the game, you have to know the players. And I'll repeat that because in a minute. So that's the Yetzer Hara, that voice is coming and saying that your animal self, that's all of you. That's everything. That's the truth. And that's where you should engage your life from that space of unconsciousness. That's where you have to live your whole life. The Yetzer Hara, that evil inclination, is not just a potential to become unaware of Hashem. It's an active force of distraction and delusion. It operates as if, God forbid, God, Hashem, and our neshama, the part of God that's in us, does not exist. And that we are fully material, gluttonous, worldly beings. And it encourages us to engage in all those behaviors, worldly behaviors, that make us, either make us feel good, eat, sleep, steal, or make us feel bad. But that's what it tells us to be engaging in all the time. Like I said, the reason I'm spending so much time on this and really devoting today's class to clarifying all these ideas is because we're going to be learning more and more about our animal self and soul. And in order to do the work, to fight the inner battles that take place in the recesses of our mind and our hearts, we need to know the players. Like Rabbi Twersky said, often our lack of happiness and our lack of meaning is our lack of spiritual understanding. And he was a very famous doctor, but also a rabbi, and he understood he was able to mix the two of them. In order to know how to play the game, we need to know the players. So our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, is one player. Our Nefesh HaBahamis, our animal self, is another player. Everyone, different, they all take different places on the field. In simple words, our animal self is the potential for disconnect, and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is the drive of distraction and delusion that wants us to be stuck in a place of non-awareness and unconsciousness. Our evil inclination is also our ego. See, often people translate the animal self as ego. But no, you see, the animal self, the natural, the natural state of being, the natural, it's not actually our ego, because it has the potential, and it can be harnessed for profound, energetic, passionate, deep awareness of Hashem. We can use all those feelings, that we gain from that are naturally come, either our anger, our laziness, our indulgence in this world, the pleasures that we want. Even though those have potential for badness, we can harness all of those for connection and goodness to Hashem. It's not our ego. our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, is our ego. Because how do we understand it? When we learn more about our neshama, our animal soul, which is the actual part of God, we're going to learn, we're going to understand, we're going to recognize that it's two things. When we learn about our godly self, we have our animal self and our godly self, or our aware self, our awesome self. We're going to learn something interesting. First of all, our awesome self is our innermost true self. It's our true identity. It's our most precious thing. Think about a diamond ring. First of all, if you have a diamond, wow, it sparkles, it's amazing. And if you have a ring, it's very nice, a gold ring. Now, what happens when you take the diamond, the ring, and you put it on the ring? It doesn't become a ring with a diamond. Because of the value of the diamond has such a high value, it becomes a diamond ring. It now becomes identified by the thing that is so much more valuable and shining and precious. And so that is what so much more with us. The part of Hashem within us is the diamond within us. It raises our value, our greatness, our awesomeness. And it's worth so much more than anything else definitive about us. And so eventually, we become identified by that part of us, by the diamond within us, by the godliness within us. That is our true self. That is our true identity. So that's number one when it comes to learning about the second part of our operating system, the second driver of our operating system. Also, we also recognize that the neshama, the godly part, the godliness within us, gives us inherent, unconditional, unstoppable value. Our identity, our self-worth comes from there. So these two things, our identity and our value, are essential to all human beings. We all need to know how precious we are, and we all need to know what our value is, and we all need to know that we matter. We all need to know that we make a difference, that we count, that we're worth something, that we belong. These are essential human needs. And Hashem gives us the tools, God gives us the tools to access that and know that. So our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, it's our drive towards distraction from Hashem. It doesn't want to acknowledge our true self. It wants to get into our mind and psyche and push away those things that we need so essentially, the preciousness, the diamond that we are, the self-worth that we have. From the perspective of our evil inclination, that's not our true self. We have no true self. We have no true value. It operates, like I said, as if God doesn't really exist, or that our neshama doesn't exist. And that God, chas v'shalom, God forbid, or it operates that if Hashem does exist, or our neshama does exist, it's totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference in the practical reality. It's a totally different thing. Practically, we don't need it. And the same thing for our neshama. So the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, says, fine, okay, it exists. But it's a theory. It's a nice idea. It's for someone else. It doesn't make any difference to me. It doesn't make a difference to myself, to my parenting, to my relationships, to my life. But because the Yetzer Hara has this perspective and attitude, it has a problem. It's missing out on having a core identity and a personal value. You see, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is always busy trying to tell us that everything else doesn't exist. It's always trying to convince us. So it doesn't really have its own self-worth, its own self-identity. And that's the invention of our ego. That's the Yetzer Hara. That's our ego that comes into play. You see, because all these things are essential needs, and our Yetzer Hara invents and protects our identity and personal value. So basically, our ego is basically saying, I need this, I need that, because of who I am. It's taking all our material and not material. It takes all our negative, our actualization of our negative traits, and it explains why we need them and why we should have them. And it gives us rational ideas, and that's our ego. Our ego is that part of us that explains to us and explains to everyone else why I have all this expression, why I'm allowing the Yetzer Hara to give expression to my animal self. And ego is an inventive self that we develop in place of having to have ownership and connection and awareness and tuning into our true self. When we lose sight of our true self and we develop our non-true self, or we're busy giving expression to all the parts of our animal self, we invented a self, and we invent a fake self because we need to keep working on it, and that's our ego. Our ego will always be as strong as our lack of awareness of our core identity and value. Unfortunately, the stronger our ego is, the more fragile and sensitive we actually are, because it's just a cover and a cover and a cover. And the bigger we're putting that cover, it's actually more of just a hiding and hiding and hiding. What's it like? It's like a balloon. The bigger you blow the balloon, the easier for it to pop. The bigger my ego grows, the more sensitive it becomes, and the less resilient it is. The greater imagination we have, the greater we think, I'm going to be the biggest whatever, the greater lack of awareness, unfortunately. The greater we lose sight of our true identity and true value. The more we need an ego, the more we invent an ego. And then it's a vicious cycle for us. So